very much, Peter. We hope you enjoy tonight as John comes up and sets up. I would just like to sort of give a little bit of a chat. This is what we normally do. We normally chat to each other, normally intermingle. We don't do much men's secret business. This is normally just we chat to each other about what's happening in our lives. Some of us have got easier lives than others, and we try and share with others. Okay, all over to you, John.
Thank you guys for having me, and it's better. Good, it's going. Is that better? No. No? Okay, great. Okay, so can you all hear me? No, you can't. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah. Just a little. So tell us when you can hear me well at the back. That's good now for you?
Yeah, it's getting better.
Oh, I can tell. Cool. Yeah, because there's nothing worse than only hearing half of it. Yeah, true.
That's it.
Ice block. Yeah. Okay, so I'll try doing this. So, a little bit about myself. I met Bill just a few weeks ago at a men's camp, and he heard a little bit about my journey. I've known his brother for a long time, so I guess he knows bits and pieces. And so he said, oh, please come along and talk about what you do in life. The journey really starts with this book. So this is a book I wrote for my patients. I was a physiotherapist for a long time, and they often had questions. Very common questions. You know, everybody knows that the Bible, the New Testament, when it was first written down, it had to be copied by hand. If somebody else wanted a copy to read it at the same time. And then as those copies got old and worn out, somebody else had to make a copy of that copy. So you got copies of copies of copies. And many people just assume that that was a process where there's lots and lots of mistakes. So I wanted to write something that was explain the situation and show people the evidence for themselves, so they can see what's been changed, what's not been changed, whether it was intentional or accidental, and most importantly, did any of it change the meaning of what Jesus said? Does any of it change anything significantly about who Jesus is? And so that was a big piece of the book, is actually showing people why you can be 100% confident that when you're reading your New Testament, you really are reading what Jesus said, and you really are reading about what he did. So that's the upshot of that. I didn't know exactly where it was going to come out. I hoped it would come out that way, but that's definitely the case. The first section is a more fundamental question. I remember when I first became a Christian, my mates at school, it was a government school, they said to me, John, what do you mean you become a Christian? They said, you don't really believe Jesus said all that stuff. No one could read or write back then, John. They're all illiterate shepherds. You're crazy. So the more fundamental question was, who could read and write back then? Was it only the privilege of a few wealthy people, or were there people from every strata of society that could read and write? Maybe not to the same high percentage as what we have, but were there poor people that could read and write? Were there rich people? And of course, if any of you have been to a lecture where you had to, where you knew you were going to be examined afterwards, you wanted to take notes. And so did they have a culture of taking notes when they listened to someone speak? In that case, was there shorthand? Was there an ability to have a skill where you could write really quickly because you used a slightly different writing style, very different actually? And so the answer is yes. And then of course, a very common question people would ask, and once these people are aggressive, many Christians have these questions, sometimes unanswered still. Many people say, well, who wrote it? Well, people who followed Jesus. So they loved him. Oh yeah, they loved him with a passion, they died for him. And what do they immediately say back? Well, they were biased. So if they were biased, you can't believe anything they wrote. And so then I talk about, well, how can you identify bias? How do you know when bias is twisting the truth, and how do you know when it's not? And did anybody else write something from a totally different perspective, from a totally different bias? So that's the three big sections of the book in a nutshell. And I wrote it for people who don't necessarily know Jesus. I wrote it for people who don't know Greek or Hebrew language. But I wrote it that it's heavily referenced, and it's a journey of discovery. It's not just a whole lot of bullet points or what we call a polemic. It's literally is my journey of discovery going through these logical questions in sequence. And it's because of that book that I ended up in Ukraine. So that's why I'm talking a bit about the book tonight. And the book is for sale here if you want it. You can get it at bookshops as well. But some people came my way and they said, John, you need to go to Russia and your book should be in Russian because people in Russia would love your book. I was really surprised. And then years went past, and then there was another Russian person sitting on my lounge chair and learned about my book and said, John, this should be in Russian. Same words. Different generations, different ethnic backgrounds, but both Russian nationality. And I thought, oh, well, maybe there's something in this. And in the background, there'd always been a guy saying, John, you need to go to Russia with me to do what you teach about in the churches there. And so when one of them did ask me to go there and teach, I said, surely there's somebody else in the Northern Hemisphere. It's a mighty long way to go. And they said, oh, we don't really like Americans, so they're a bit racist. There's not many Christians left in England, I guess, so next port of call is me. So, and they said, oh, you're a bit different. So I went there to teach, and I went there to see whether there was any publishers in Russia that thought that the book should be in Russian. And I met 4 of them that did. And so then it became a book in Russian. So that was exciting. I never expected that. That was really great. And then about that time it ended up in Arabic language, published in Egypt. So that was a really interesting story as well. I never expected that one. But when it came out in Russia, in Russian language, I immediately felt this urge that there should be some copies going to Ukraine. And I can't give you a logical reason why I had that urge. There's no Ukrainian blood in me. I knew very little about it at the time. Maybe in my primary school years I thought of Cossacks and Ukraine, maybe there was that. But there's this really strong urge, you've got to get some copies into Ukraine. And in Ukraine there are a lot of people who can speak and read Russian. And so I said to the publishing house in St. Petersburg, can you do this? Can you make this happen? And 3 months later they said, oh, we tried and we couldn't. And I thought, that's not good enough. I said, look, I will pay for them to go all the way from St. Petersburg into Ukraine. I'll look after all the freight. You just got to get them there. Another 3 months passed and they said, we've tried all the normal private courier companies. You cannot get your book into Ukraine. And of course this was 2018. Russia had already invaded and taken a massive big hunk of Ukraine in 2014. But I thought that war had stopped. I didn't realise that the Russian front, the new front line, was a continual war zone. It was just low key. It never stopped. And that animosity is what was causing problems with people in Russia doing business in Russia, not wanting to seem to be helping the enemy, the people that are stopping Russia owning all the rest of the world. So anyway, through devious means it got to Moldova. And then I said to the guy in Moldova, can you get it to Ukraine? And he said he could, because Russia and Moldova had a little bit more peace between them. And then I wanted to know, well, who are these people in Ukraine that have got my book? And so I rang them up, and of course with internet, the way it is, and video conferencing and COVID, we then developed a friendship. And that was a really, really deep friendship that happened quite quickly. They were a young family, they were a pastor of a young church. And then as time went by, the big February 22nd invasion of Russia, so the second big phase of the war happened, where Russia suddenly poured a lot of troops over the border and full-on, full-scale war. So a lot of the women and the children are leaving. So this is a bit of an unusual refugee situation. A lot of modern refugee situations, especially around the Middle East, when you look at the crowds, they're mostly men. But this was all women and children because the men weren't allowed to leave. They were meant to be fighting for their country, fighting for their livelihoods. And so this family I knew got split. So she's suddenly going to another country with 1.2, 1.5 million other people, big rush across the border. She can't take her husband with her, and she's 2 weeks before she's due to have a baby. She has a baby over there. And I ring her up. It actually wasn't 2 weeks, it was only maybe 5 days, it seemed to me. And I got to talk to her shortly after her baby was born, while she's in this other country. And I was saying, you know, it's because this family, the woman, the wife, could speak great English. And I said to her, you know, I'm really sorry, sad about what's happening. And I said, we're praying about it. And then she said something. She said, oh, John, I'm just praying for all the young boys. I was thinking, what young boys? I actually asked her. I couldn't think of what young boys. Maybe she meant the young men in Ukraine that are about to go across. But she wasn't that old. She said, all the Russian young boys. So many of their soldiers are just young boys. I'm praying for them. I was thinking, what other young mum would be praying for the soldiers that have kicked her out of the country, separated her from her husband, and for all she knows, the whole country will be taken over within days. And it really was like that. The expectation in Ukraine, and the expectation in Moldova, was this would be all over in a couple of weeks. The Russians were so certain about that. Many of them, they wore dress uniforms, full dress uniforms underneath their battle fatigues, because they thought it'd only be 2 or 3 days and be able to rip off their dirty clothes and they'd be able to march victorious through the streets. And they did take, of course, a lot of Ukraine, but then thankfully over the months, Ukraine's fought back and they got some of their territory back. None of the original stuff that was taken in 2014. So my wife and I got this friendship going, and then they asked us to come and help. And we very much believe that if someone asks you to help, and it looks like you could probably help, you need a really good reason not to go. My wife thinks a war is a really good reason not to go. She was quite afraid. But we felt that this is where God wanted us to go. And so we went there for 2 months last year. And so I'll take you a little bit on a journey now through these PowerPoints. What I want you to see is really how do Christians live in the middle of the night, 24 hours a day, day in, day out for 3.5 years. Because it is night time like that for them. It's a really dark time in their lives. So I want to instill in you this ability to see, well, this is how Christian communities can live and even thrive when it's always the night. We can talk about geopolitics later on during question and answer, but I most want to talk about Jesus, and so we'll go through a bit of the story, okay? So this is my wonderful wife, Dr. Clerke. We go in with backpacks for a variety of reasons. For a start, it's really quick. Compared to a car, one of my friends took 14 hours to leave Ukraine in a car. Usually it takes 4 or 6 hours, so we walk across, that's the no man's land, hence all the barbed wire fence. There's about 250 metres between the Polish border and the Ukrainian border. There's that no man's land, if you like. So that's us walking in through there. She's a PhD doctor, biomedical sciences, so she's all about hand injuries. And there's a lot of hand injuries there. The skill set of Ukrainians is very, very behind, and they've got massive numbers of patients. They are at extreme end of damage, and they really are struggling. So that's Anita. This is a bit of a map for those of you who might not be sure where Ukraine is. Ukraine's a little purple patch there. The rest of all that red stuff is Russia. So Russia is about 29 times bigger than Ukraine, and Ukraine's managed to keep Russia away from every square inch of its country for 3.5 years now. So it's pretty amazing. Sort of a David and Goliath story, really. This is the Ukrainian border. You can sort of see like this. So that's the west, where it's relatively safe. Big city, Lviv, not far from the Polish border. And then over here, this is where all the front line is now. Crimea was taken back in 2014. This is a frontline city. And Kherson is another frontline city. Where's Kherson? Kherson's actually about here. So these circles just simply represent where we went. But we don't always stay together. Some people say, what sort of a husband are you? You bring your wife to a war-torn country and then you split. We were there this year for a full month and for over 2 weeks. She was way in the west, which is a bit safer, and I was way in the east. Two reasons for that. The east is certainly quite dangerous, and the west is where she's really needed. We go where we're needed, where we're invited, so that means that someone's got to be willing to admit we need help. Not every person that works in every hospital admits they need help. So where we go depends on their ability to say we need a world expert and we want them for free. And so we go there for free. And it's our way of showing love for them from Jesus. You know, people invariably ask you, why are you here? And because no one else is here. So, and then when they find out that you're not with WHO or somebody like that, you know, I've only met one WHO person. And they're usually there just for a week and then they go again. When they find out that we're doing this because we love them, and because we love them only because of Jesus, I'm not naturally loving, then it has a big deal. So that's why sometimes we're needers in Lviv, or we're both in different places. Kremenchuk is where you'll see a little bit of stuff where I was this year, and so we'll move on. So just get you orientated once again. Relatively safe. Russia's swarming across from here. When they came in early 2022, they came in from the north. Chernobyl, some of you would have heard the Chernobyl nuclear plant. It's sort of between Kiev and the Belarusian border. So Belarus allowed huge numbers of Russians to pour through their borders in 2022. But they're not a puppet state. What do you do when you're there? You get an app. Everywhere you go, you get an app. This is an air raid alert app. So it goes off every time that there's an air raid alert. So when we were there for the first time, this thing would go off 5 or 6 times a day, and you're meant to go in your bunker. This is Poland. Don't know who the old man is. Basically crossing the border. Nita, we were there for 2 months at the beginning. She had half a day of tourism. So this is her half day out of the 2 months when she got to look around with a beautifully wonderful helper, Ukrainian helper, who's now a doctor. This normally would be full of people. So she was almost crying because normally this would be full of tourists. There's no one there now. There's no queues, there's nothing. We travel by trains. Sometimes they're very Russian, Soviet style, sometimes they're a bit new. Often we're having to travel overnight. Now this is a bomb shelter. If it looks like a car park, it's because it is. So bomb shelters, if there is one, is typically just a car park. There's no toilets there, there's no chairs there, there's no showers there. You're told as soon as you cross the border, there's 3 things you need to have with you all the time. Your mobile phone, your battery pack for your mobile phone, because you could be in there a long, long time, and water, and something to sit on, because it's just concrete. And you can be there for a very, very long time. But no one goes. No one goes because it's too full on. So you can imagine at night, 3 times the air raid alarms go off, and I might play that if we get time later on. It's just that classic World War II sound you've heard, that and it just goes on and on. And but you imagine living there. Can you get up out of bed 3 times? And of course one air raid alarm may still not have been finished. In other words, you've not heard the clearance alarm before the next one starts up again. Because the Russians don't just send a volley of missiles over once in the night. They send them throughout the night. So the noise just continues and everyone's tired and no one goes to the bomb shelter unless the building beside you. Now everywhere you go you see the war, signs of war. So you can see this guy's got his forearm and his arm, and he's got bits of metal sticking into him from this triangular metal frame that sits on the outside, and there to hold all these bits of bone in place. So you can see a lot of that just where we are. That was at the church. Ukraine, this is in Kiev. They have big, beautiful shopping centres, just like we do. Not all of them have been bombed yet. So it's just how luxurious, just like I guess a Chermside shopping centre is. They have the same sort of deal. In Poland, I would be like every other bloke looking for a man seat. Somewhere to sit while my wife would go shopping. In Poland, you cannot find space on a man seat. In these shopping centres, they're just women. You rarely see men. You go in peak hour time, huge numbers of women, not so many men. Many of them are dead or fighting or whatever. There's plenty of food there still, but the prices have gone up a lot. Electricity is really expensive compared to before. Obviously, when huge amounts of the population move from the east to the west, some of them keep going. So there's about 3.5 million refugees at any one point in time. Their population is only about, or was, about 39 million. So at any one point in time, there's at least 3.5 million of them living overseas. There's about another 3 million or so, actually very close to 4 million, that aren't living in their own homes anymore. So they're internally displaced. They're still in the same country, but they're not in the same city. About 80% of those have been internally displaced for well over a year, and roughly, I think it's about 60% have been displaced more than once. This is what the app looks like on your phone, so it goes off, and you think, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to go down to the bomb raid shelter? So you look at it, it tells you, okay, this is dark red, so that's particularly bad. This is what's been launched. You can find out how many MiG jet bombers have been launched, or how many cruise missiles or whatever are coming your way. This lets you know that there's some action happening at the front line. And then as that wave of bombers and missiles settles down, it changes colour back into a softer colour. So that sort of gives you some way of making your own assessment. I would look out the window, and if I could still see people walking to the bus stop, I thought, okay, I can do that too. I can just stay and keep working here. But the one night when we were in Kiev, it was bucketing rain. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. It was our first week there. Air raid alarms going off in our room, and on the street, and on our app. And there's thunder and lightning. And I've got no idea now, is that thunder? Or is that something blowing up? And I can't look down the street. So we did go down that night and joined a few other people. Some of it's very beautiful. This actually is a hospital where Anita worked. You think you may be looking at Switzerland or something. And once upon a time when the USSR was around, that was when this place was built. And it's probably built mostly for the Communist Party officials. But it's well and truly full now of people needing to be patched up. My wife teaches surgeons, junior surgeons, and hand injury therapists. Hand injury therapists are either physios or occupational therapists who then specialise, and in the West that takes 2 years. Just like an orthopaedic surgeon who wants to be a hand surgeon, he or she then has to spend another year to become a hand surgeon. The hands are really complex. And so we would take a lot of this stuff over in our backpacks. This last time we went, we took over suture material. One of the surgeons we knew he could get rough suture material, but he couldn't get the fine stuff. I thought, that's just so tragic. It really is, when you think that you're in a major hospital and you can't get the right suture material. We even brought over a headlamp so he could actually see what he was doing. And then I would also sometimes, you're probably wondering what I do there. In the first trip I was her gopher,